This is an n8n workflow designed to take YouTube transcripts and convert them to high quality LinkedIn posts. I'm gonna walk through all the different steps, design considerations, and I'm gonna also explain how I'm able to generate images that are consistent using Nano Banana Pro. I'm also gonna talk about prompt engineering. 80% of my time was just on these two nodes. Developing the workflow is actually not as complicated as people think, and the hardest part is actually the prompt engineering. I take a segment of a transcript for a podcast or long form content. Here's a good example, a 2-hour podcast with Bill Gurley. Now, one thing you want to consider when you're using workflows like this is garbage in, garbage out. They're spanning across a wide variety of topics, segmenting chunks of the podcast that I think are the most relevant. I'll head on down to YouTube, open up transcripts. It'll take me to the side here. You can toggle timestamps on or off. And then what I'm doing is just copying and pasting the section that aligns with the content that I'm trying to create. Paste it into column A, which I'm calling YouTube transcript, content status as pending. We're gonna be pulling in the transcript. This particular step is just to mine relevant details, which is then gonna be passed on to the content engine. We're gonna pass on that information to a JavaScript node. We're gonna merge it back here from the original transcript. That's gonna be important so we can upload it back to Google Sheets. We're then gonna generate an image. We're gonna save that image to Google Drive, and then we're gonna have our final piece here where we're able to go back and just proofread it before we actually send it out. For people online claiming that you can do your content creation entirely AI-based without human oversight, they're lying to you. The truth is, as your brand scales, or if you're working for a company, you gotta be very careful before something actually makes it to publishing. Think of AI like a dog. Dogs can be trained very well, but ultimately if that dog bites someone and does something that it wasn't supposed to do, your brand and reputation are at risk. You have to be very thoughtful about designing workflows specifically around content generation, provide oversight, cherry pick what's relevant, and then proofread it before you actually submit. This is where you can look through the LinkedIn text post, confirm it looks good. You can review the image itself, confirm it looks good, press submit. So if you like it, you'll set it to ready. And then here is where we'll have this set up to run on a scheduled trigger, run once a day. It's then gonna pull all of this information. It's gonna get the post, it's gonna download the image, it's gonna create the post, and then it's gonna post it on LinkedIn and we're gonna update the sheet. So when I look at the image prompt that we got, what I'm actually doing is taking this to Gemini Pro with my account. Gemini Pro is able to run Nano Banana Pro, which is a great way for me to do iterations to test consistency to make sure the outputs that I'm getting actually align with what I'm trying to create before I actually start paying for the API calls in this workflow. The model that I'm using here is just 2.5 Flash image gen. So this is Nano Banana, but it's the cheaper version. So when I get the output here, this looks terrible. I would never actually post this. This is more just to test the actual workflow. But with respect to actually testing the quality of the image output, I'm using the exact same image output. I'm just using it with a more powerful model and I'm testing it in the Gemini app itself, because on the Gemini app, it's able to use Nano Banana Pro. Once everything is working perfectly, when you actually bring this to production, that's when you would swap out the model to Nano Banana Pro. Otherwise, you're just gonna burn credits with respect to testing. Getting the actual prompts right, in my opinion, is everything. Open this up. We're actually using Gemini 2.5 Flash-Lite. 2.5 Flash-Lite is a non-thinking model. It's very cheap and very efficient to run, especially if you're putting in a lot of dense text. You want to be very thoughtful about the steps that you're asking of it because it's not going to be able to do chain of thought reasoning the way thinking models will. We're trying to be very explicit around its focus, so entirely on extracting the most specific arguments, statistics, and logical causalities from the text. And then we give some examples. So specific numbers, so we're looking for percentages, dollar amounts, time frames that are mentioned in the actual transcripts themselves. Specific nouns, so tool names, company names, historic events, proper nouns. Direct logic, so if the speaker says X causes Y, capture that causality clearly. And then the only thing we're really expecting from an output structure is we want it to be broken up into 5-step logic where we have a hook. We're then gonna have the problem, which is gonna be broken up over 2 panels. The shift, which is gonna be a 3rd panel. The solution, which is gonna be panel 4. And then the close, which is gonna be panel 5. Put it into a canvas style like this, where you have your 2 prompts that you can go back and forth with. And then what's important is when you actually have the conversation, mention how these prompts are related. Take a screenshot of the entire workflow and put that into the chat so it understands how these prompts are working side by side. Make mention of the model that you're actually using for each of the different nodes. And then talk about the desired output. So many cases when I was iterating specifically on the image generation, I'm actually taking images in this chat, bringing them over and saying, here's the actual text prompt that we got as the output, here's the image, here's what I like, what I don't like. And why it's important to use a canvas is because it avoids context rot. You overwhelm a conversation with just subtle changes. Eventually it's going to start to drift and it'll start dropping off sections, and it's unpredictable. It's very annoying. What's also great about Gemini is you can just highlight sections that you want to focus in on and then ask it to make subtle tweaks here. So now let's just quickly talk about Nano Banana Pro. This is arguably the best model per cost for image output. And I think where it really excels is in infographics. There's some amazing examples you can look up online. The amount of depth and detail is just fantastic. You want to work backwards from this. Start off by picking a framework that you like. Do you want it to be vertical? Do you want it to be landscape? You want to think about your color scheme, the type of illustrations that you want. There's so much nuance to this, and that's why I spent so much time doing a lot of testing in the Gemini app. I'm going to share the prompts and the entire template so you can review this all afterwards. It focuses on ultimately having 5 end-to-end images. You can see the images span side to side. It's on an off-white color, so it stands out a little bit more. There's not a lot of text. And although these models can do very well at generating text without making errors, it still can sometimes occur. So it's important to emphasize not having too much text in the instructions. But this is a consistent output that I really like and aligns with my brand and what I'm trying to convey. This initial system prompt, this is where I spent the most amount of time. And we want it to return in a JSON output so it's easier to pass on down the chain. Before it even starts generating any content, I'm asking it to first do part 0, which I'm calling the narrative strategy. So this is a critical step. Before generating any output, you must identify a single narrative thread. And the reason for this is I may be putting in too much of a transcript. I do my best to actually carve out a portion of the discussion that makes the most sense. There can be cases where multiple topics are being covered. So the fix, you must pick one dominant angle and ruthlessly discard unrelated facts. And the importance of this is because when I eventually get back to posting this on LinkedIn, it's limited, right? We can't cover 9 or 10 topics in this particular format style. So we're really focusing it to say, before you do anything, pick a dominant angle, start with that. Then the goal, you want it to directly answer the problem. So we don't want there to be a disconnect where it's just outputting 5 segments that are unrelated. We want it to follow that narrative arc. We also ask it to perform a logic check. So ask yourself, does the final sentence of the post solve the first sentence? If not, realign the narrative. So we're allowing it to spend thinking tokens at the onset just to develop the narrative based on the input that we're getting from the transcript miner. The next thing that we're doing is actually doing the text first. And why I think it's important to do the text first versus the image generation prompt first is because large language models were ultimately trained on code, often text characters. I'm not expecting this to output something that is going to be postable right off the gate, but I'm trying to get something that's 90% of the way there, and I'm going to review it before I actually get it out. So I talk about my voice and tone should feel like a spoken cadence. And depending on your brand, the company you're working for, if you're doing this for yourself, you may not want to follow this voice and tone. I emphasize to use metaphorical anchors, so use strong metaphors to bridge concepts. And then I also put here some hard constraints around forbidden elements. And again, these are just the dead giveaways for AI slop. So I don't want corporate buzzwords like navigate, thrive, future-proof, just all the garbage that you see on LinkedIn. I don't want any filler phrases. I don't want any engagement bait, no hashtags, and then no M dashes. That's gonna go down in history as the dead giveaway. Something is AI generated. And then finally, the structure. So again, why it's important to first do it in text is because this is perfectly gonna feed into the image prompt. We're using a very capable model. You wanna do research on Nano Banana Pro to understand how it actually listens to instructions. So in this case, this is part 2, the most critical part, especially if you're using an image generator. I want full width, edge to edge, watercolor illustrations. If we look at some of the past examples when I was working through this initially, there were times where I got outputs like this that I still think are very good outputs. I don't think this is necessarily a bad output, but I was looking for that edge to edge and I wanted them to be stacked. Ensure the visual subjects mirrors the specific metaphors used. So again, if the text mentions wiring, use wiring. And then this is really critical is you actually want to give it a template at the end because this is what ultimately is going to be the deliverable that's provided to the image generation prompt. And then we actually included some simple negative prompts that we want it to avoid. So as you start experimenting with this, there'll be aspects that you just want to pluck out. And that's where I think the negative prompt is very valuable. Deploying this, regardless if you're using this for yourself, you're using this for a larger scale client, the stakes are very high when it comes to content creation. You need that human intervention. People can smell bullshit and AI slop a mile away. I want to really refine the text to make sure that it aligns with what I'm trying to convey.